Okay, guys, so today we're going to be talking about signposts for nonfiction texts. So last week I said that we were going to start reading nonfiction texts with this first unit, and signposts are a way to help us annotate those texts and kind of think more deeply about those texts. So you might have already learned about signposts in middle school, and if you have, that's okay. This is just a review to help you out and to make sure that we're all starting out on the same foot. But if you haven't learned about them, then that's awesome too, because today you will learn about them. So story time. Back when I was in elementary school and middle school and even high school, I would always get in trouble because my teachers would tell me to annotate, and I didn't really know what that meant. So I would take a highlighter and I would just highlight everything on the page, and that's what I thought annotating was. I didn't realize that the word note was literally in annotation, which meant that I had to be writing down notes, especially relevant notes. So I would always get bad grades on my annotations because it was just highlighting and there was no purpose behind it. So what these signposts do is they help give us a purpose for reading and a purpose for analyzing, and they kind of help us with a starting point if we don't know where to start with our analysis of these texts. So whenever we're reading something for class, I do want us to enjoy that reading, but if we're reading it for like a test or something, then we also need to be reading with a purpose, because if we don't read with a purpose, then we might get confused, or we might not answer the prompt or the multiple choice questions correctly because we aren't looking for the things that they want us to look for. So what the signposts do is they help you figure out what you're being asked to look at instead of having to address the whole thing at once. So here we go. On to the next slide. Okay, so why these signposts? This is another definition aside from my definition. These slides were made by the school district, so it is very important that I show you these slides. But anyways, why signposts? So good readers are alert to the signposts that authors provide. When they see those signposts in their reading, they stop, take notice, and make a note. Because of this, they understand what they read better, and they understand and appreciate the author's craft as a writer. So if you'll remember back to last week, I talked about how everything that a person does is like an argument, right? And so what author's craft means is all the little choices that an author makes that goes into conveying their argument to their readers. So every single choice, remember, is super important if you want to be an effective communicator. So these signposts help us understand those choices a little bit more clearly. Okay, so when we're reading nonfiction, there are three big questions that we should ask ourselves. What surprised me about the text? What did the author think I already knew? So remember, nonfiction, it's not just going to be stuff that's written recently, like the news. It's going to be some older stuff too. So a lot of times the author assumed that their audience knew certain things that we might not know today if it was written 100 years ago or 200 years ago, because the audiences of 1820 and 1920 were a lot different than the audiences of 2020. So what does the author assume that you already know? And the last question, what challenged, changed, or confirmed what I knew? So what is something that's different from what I believed, or maybe has changed my mind about what I believed, or kind of reaffirmed what I believe? Okay, so as you can see, there are signposts for both nonfiction texts and literary texts, which we will get into later. And today we're just going to talk about two of the nonfiction signposts that we're going to be using this week. So contrasts and contradictions and word gaps. We'll get back to those other ones later this unit. Okay, so first up, we've got a little video kind of explaining that first one, Introduction to Contrast and Contradictions.
Today we're going to talk about nonfiction notice and note signposts.
What is a signpost? When you're driving a car, you notice the signs on the road and do as they ask you to. It's the same with reading. Common patterns or signs become recognizable and you should respond. In reading, we call these signs signposts. These are places you recognize as important and where you need to stop, notice, and ask yourself a question. first signpost, contrasts and contradictions. Define contrasts and contradictions. When you're reading, the author shows you a difference between what you know and what's happening in the text. Or they show you a difference between two or more things in the text. When this happens, you should stop and ask yourself, what is the difference and why does it matter? Let's see how contrasts and contradictions show up in text. Sometimes they can be very obvious. Sparta was content to keep to itself and provided army assistance when necessary. Athens, on the other hand, wanted to control more and more of the land around them. On the other hand, is the author's signal that he's going to show us how Athens differed from Sparta. Now for the next example. Even though the temperature dipped below 32 degrees, the water did not freeze. We are tipped off by the phrase, even though, that something we would not expect to happen is going to. Remember, water freezes at 32 degrees, so it's kind of odd that the water didn't freeze. Let's work together to identify more contrasts and contradictions.
Okay, so hopefully that was a good little intro to contrasts and contradictions. So this is very similar to the organizational patterns that we talked about last week of compare and contrast, and sometimes of cause and effect. So contrasts and contradictions are a difference between two or more things in a text, and it's when the author shows the reader a difference between the reader's perception and what is actually happening in a text. So basically what we expected to happen and what really happened. Expectations versus reality. This is also a form of irony of when our expectations don't match reality. So keep that in mind because irony is something that we'll talk about a lot during the year. So basically contrasts and contradictions. What is ironic about this text? What did we expect to happen that did not happen? Or vice versa. So something in the text is different than what you expected to read, or something in the text contradicts what you read previously. That is contrasts and contradictions. So whenever we see a contrast or a contradiction, we should ask ourselves, what is this difference and why does it matter? So if you'll remember last week, I said that we're going to be asking ourselves why a lot. So it's not just enough to identify things or to point them out in the text, but we need to figure out why is it there and is it effective? So why is that difference there and why does that difference matter? The answers to these questions could help you see details that help you identify the main idea, signal a compare and contrast or a cause and effect relationship, or to help you understand the author's purpose. Okay, so I want you to watch this video, and while you're watching, I want you to think about how this video contrasts with your knowledge and experience of what school is like.
Aujourd'hui, c'est dimanche le 30 mars 2000. Le maître envoie Isra à la boutique, mais lui ne connaît pas le... Oui, Omar, qu'est-ce que ça? Oui. Encore? C'est bien. Ok, donc vous écrivez ça. Donc, bien. Ok. Amine, touche-toi. Ok, on note.
Okay, so again, how does that video contrast with your knowledge and experience of what school is like? Okay, moving on. Our next one that we're talking about today, the second one, is word gaps. So this little video, I'm going to read it to you because it doesn't have a voiceover and the words go kind of fast. So let's watch this little video. Notes and notes signposts for nonfiction. Word gap, rare words and are reading and notice the author uses a word or phrase you don't know, stop and ask yourself, does this seem like technical talk for experts of this topic? The answer to the anchor question will tell you if you need to look the word up or keep reading for more information. By noticing where the word appears, you can find it earlier in the text, the sentence, or later in the text. Or you might not be able to find it and have to use outside sources such as a dictionary and an easier text on the same topic, a friend, or a teacher. Remember to use the answer will help you. Oops, sorry. Trying to pause the video. Okay, so that was word gaps. So just to recap, it's when the author uses words or phrases that the reader doesn't recognize or know yet. So this would be words that you don't know or phrases and expressions that you don't recognize. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you're dumb or that you're ignorant or that you're stupid or whatever. It just means that this person is probably writing from a very different field of experience than what you have. So like, for example, I am not a computer person. So if I were reading a manual on how to code, I probably wouldn't understand a lot of it. And that's not because I'm dumb, it's just because I haven't had that experience yet. So when we find words that we don't understand, it's not anything about our intelligence, it just means we haven't had that practice yet that author obviously had. So when we find word gaps in our reading, we need to figure out, do I need to use a dictionary for this? Or can I try to figure it out using context clues? So yes, this next slide says that when we get to those word gaps, we need to say or ask ourselves, does this seem like technical talk for this topic? Or can I use clues in the sentence to help me understand the word? So that will help us decide if we need to look up the word or if we can keep reading for context clues or for more information. I would recommend to try and look as much as you can for context clues because you won't always have a dictionary available to you. I know right now you can pull out your phone or you can use your laptop or your iPad or whatever to look things up, but when you get into more serious situations, like if you're taking an SAT or ACT or the TSI or an AP test, you don't have a dictionary available to you, and there probably will be a lot of word gaps on those higher level tests. So you need to try to get into the practice of using those context clues as much as possible to figure out what the words mean. Okay, so here is our last video for today. We've got the scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson explaining wormholes. So while you're watching the video, I want you to consider what new vocabulary or terminology is introduced, and how does Neil deGrasse Tyson help us understand the meaning of these terms?
We think we had wormholes figured out on paper. So Einstein's general theory of relativity, which is our understanding of how gravity works in the universe, says that any presence of mass or energy will warp the fabric of space and time. And so you can think to yourself, imagine warping space and time in such a way that you can cut a portal from your location in space and emerge in another location in space. So these wormholes, which we can describe on paper, we don't really know how to make them. And if we did know how to make them, we wouldn't know how to keep them open. The equations show that they are unstable. You might step inside and then it would collapse down on top of you, and who knows whether that's a good thing or not. It's probably not. In Interstellar, they went into black holes and through wormholes with high confidence that they would survive. But that's where the storytelling kicks in and the physics ends. I mean, it's science fiction. So a black hole is a region of space within which light doesn't come out. Nothing comes out. If you fall in, you don't come out. But it's a hole in the three-dimensional fabric of space. So it means you can fall in from any direction. Normally when we think of a hole, like you remove a manhole cover and there's a hole in the street. You fall through the hole, you come out the other side, and you can look and see where you came out. If there's a hole in space. You've fallen from any direction, you end up in another place. And if that hole connects to another place, then you have a wormhole combining the two places that you might have fallen in. And you get a black hole by a very extreme high concentration of matter. And when you have that high concentration, the gravity right in the vicinity of that continues to go up and up and up. Then it reaches the threshold where light does not escape. That's when you would call it a black hole. The sun will never be a black hole, but there's stars in the night sky that we can identify that when they die and they run out of energy to hold themselves up, the thermonuclear fusion in their core ends, and the total gravity of all the material of that star overcomes everything else that would otherwise sustain it. And it collapses down to a singularity, a black hole. So you want to avoid black holes? Really? At all cost.
Okay, so again, that question for that video was, what new vocabulary or terminology is introduced, and how does the speaker help us understand the meaning of these terms? Okay, so those are the only two signposts that we're getting into today. What I would like you to do next is to answer one more open-ended question here in this ed puzzle. And then you are going to go into the textbook. I show you how to do that on the next page of the module back in Canvas. And you're going to complete the first little assignment there, which is the critical vocabulary that you'll need to understand for the article that we're reading tomorrow. So please, please, please get that done today. It shouldn't take too long. It's only a few vocabulary words and then a little bit of practice with making claims. And that's all you have for today. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. If you need anything, you can visit me in office hours, or I am on Zoom during your class. Be sure to check out the new Zoom links in the announcement that I sent out this morning. See you later. So, oops.